The UFC is not the only game in town, but it's the only one that really matters in practice because its would-be competitors have failed to mount a viable commercial threat. Francis Ngannou just left one of those floundering competitors and is now on a Netflix MVP MMA card. It's got me thinking, what if one-off events like this are the only viable threat to the UFC? Welcome to another edition of Fight Night Thoughts from Watch the Ops. I'm Denzel Cadet, the managing member of Cadet Legal and also a diehard sports and MMA fan. Watch the Ops is a show where we identify business opportunities, see how businesses explore and operate to optimize those opportunities. In this context, I love talking about MMA because it is a newer sports framework and there's a lot of movement, a lot of transactions. Everybody knows the UFC, so much so that oftentimes when you talk to people about MMA, they'll use the UFC as a synonym. Do you like boxing or do you like UFC? Really, they mean, do you like boxing or do you like MMA? The UFC has become synonymous with MMA because it's done a great job of growing both inorganically and organically. Inorganically, the UFC has grown through strategic transactions, both M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and other types of deals like joint ventures, licensing, and brand transactions. The biggest one, of course, is the almost $8 billion rights deal with Paramount Plus. Because the UFC is so big and so successful, unfortunately, it appears that it doesn't have to take all of the stakeholders in account. It doesn't have to care about its fighters, and it doesn't necessarily have to care about its customers. So we're seeing in the aftermath of the Paramount deal that both fighters and customers are complaining about the changes, the ways that the post-closing integration is affecting them. For fighters, they're talking about how their pay hasn't changed and how they're not able to share in the upside as much as they were when they were pay-per-views. For customers, the diehard fans like you and I, we're seeing that there are changes in the quality and the delivery of the product. But the UFC doesn't have any viable competitors and they're making good money. So they don't necessarily have to take these concerns from us, these other stakeholders, into account. In the meantime, its competitors are floundering. I mentioned the PFL. The PFL did try to scale up through inorganic growth, a strategic acquisition of fellow MMA promotion Bellator. We've been discussing the last few weeks how this acquisition of Bellator is largely a failure, in our opinion, due to lack of operational planning and lapses in post merger integration. That's really not the focus of this video. We'll continue to talk about that elsewhere. But one aspect where the PFL has failed post closing is in its integration and retention of talent. They've lost big names like Kayla Harrison, Patricio Pitbull, Aaron Pico, MVP, and others. Another recent one is Francis Ngannou, and that's what I want to actually talk about here. Francis left the UFC, and people thought it was a mistake. He signed with PFL, and he's made a lot of good money with the PFL, although he's only fought for them once. He's been able to make big money in boxing matches with Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. Now that he's left the PFL, people were worried, but look, he's landed on his feet again, and it's in an MMA, not boxing card on Netflix, where he stands to gain a significant purse. This got me thinking. Unless and until there is some type of big systemic change in the industry, by that I mean a change in the law and legislation or change in the labor market, unionization of the fighters so that they have something like a players association that we see in other leagues, a valuable protection for the workers, the players in other sports mergers like the NBA merger and the NFL merger. In MMA, there are no unions. So when there are big transactions like the Paramount deal or like acquisitions, the fighters don't have a way to make sure that their voices are heard the same way. Until we see a big change in law, like an Ali Act, as they have in boxing, and taking fully into account the various barriers to entry for people who want to get into the combat sports promotion game, we'll talk about those in a future video. Unless or until that big systemic change in law or in the labor market, what if the only viable competitor to the UFC, or at least thorn in the side, is a business model that commits to event by event, one off ad hoc promotion rather than committing to a full season of fights or a full year of fights? They focus on identifying talent for one date and putting all their marketing and strategic operational planning on that one event, and then that is the alternative. Enjoy the fights and remember to watch the ops.